Hi everybody, welcome to a new little Speedpaint with voiceover this time. As you can already see, I had the rare opportunity to work on a pet portrait. I don't usually draw animals, as many of you might already know, but I actually really love doing it, because that's kind of how I started out as a kid. Because it is a portrait of a specific animal, I started out with a reference that I'd put together myself out of different pictures to create a composition that looks good as a painting. With reference material, I don't usually trace because oftentimes the line quality suffers, but for accuracy and keeping the animal's proportions perfect so that they actually look like their pictures, I sometimes use it. As I go on, I fill in a flat color layer underneath my lines and just some placeholder for the sheets underneath. For this step as well, you can see that I color pick from my reference picture, just again for accuracy's sake. Our animals have very specific colors in very specific places, and to make the customer happy, I try to stick to them as closely as possible so I don't lose my way further down the rendering. You can see during this process, I use the same brush all the time. It's truly nothing fancy, it's just a square brush with little texture on it. I believe it's one of the standard brushes in Photoshop. I've done nothing fancy to it, but I love how it looks, so it's my go-to. The only special thing, I suppose, is that I've turned the size sensitivity off, so the brush doesn't react to my pressure whatsoever, and only the coverage is turned on. I feel like this gives it a more painterly look. I like using it when I'm filling in all the different areas in the beginning. What you can see as well is that I'm not zoomed in entirely while I'm working. I like to keep my distance in the beginning, so that I can see the entire picture in front of me as I'm working and just have better control over how everything looks together. And just to don't lose myself in detail, because as you will see later on, detail is not necessary everywhere. You don't want to distract from the important parts in your picture by over-rendering places that might not be as important to the overall composition. This is the part of the painting that takes almost the longest. It's just putting down all the different very specific values and color shades of the fur. Animal's fur is very interesting because if you look at an animal like this dog, you think, well, it's yellowish brown, I guess, but once you start painting and working on it, you realize how many different colors are in there. There's orange and yellow and gray and some reds, maybe even a little bit of green. And you don't really think about that until you start working on it. You can also see that I skip rather wildly all over the place during my painting process. You might also notice that there's no fully white place on my canvas at the moment. The background I started out on is always a light neutral gray, because the light from a fully white canvas can be very straining on the eyes. Especially if you maybe sit in a dark room, if you work late at night, that's not very good for you. So I advise you to use a neutral background color instead. I really like that detail of the light shining through the dog's ear, and later on I make that color and saturation even stronger. Another thing I do is flipping my canvas quite regularly, Maybe not for this piece, but most of the time I do it very, very often. I've actually made a little shortcut on my keyboard for it, just for that. And what this does is it kind of resets your brain a little bit because you get used to how something looks. And that might make it easier for you to not notice a certain mistake. And if you flip the canvas, you kind of reset your eyes and your brain a little bit, and you can notice things that you didn't see before. So I recommend you doing that very regularly. Another thing that helps with that is taking regular breaks. If you work on something for a very long time, you lose your focus a little bit, or you lose track of your goal. So having a little break, having a little reset, doing some stretches, moving about, is not only good for your body, it's also good for your art. At times when I'm really frustrated with a piece, I decide to just stop working on it for a day, maybe pick out something else, sleep on it for a night, and then start again the next morning. That's why we also all know the phenomenon of, oh no, my piece looks bad the next morning I look at it. That's probably because you look at it with fresh eyes and notice certain mistakes that you didn't see before. You see now I've put down a dark background because I've been planning on putting a starry night sky behind her, and now I'm going through the final rendering stage, which means I am now working on the line layer on top of my base color, and I'm simply overpainting everything. This stage I'm also using more varied brushes. You can see a little bit of texture appearing on the dog's face. You don't need to texture the entire animal, just in certain spaces is already enough for our brain to read this as fur. You can also see that I decided to put another paw on her from yet another reference picture, because I decided that the one cut off paw that is hidden by the blanket doesn't look quite right for the painting. Here I'm also trying to get that marking on her chest exactly right, just again for accuracy. I'm trying to match the paws a bit better to each other so that it looks more natural. When working with many different reference pictures, that is oftentimes a bit of a struggle, but don't hesitate to cut out pieces, mirror them, and fit them back together until it looks right. Here I noticed that the head and the lighting didn't quite match the backlighting that is on the body, so I increased the lighting on the side of her cheek, and you can see now that I put a little color pop where the light is shining through her ear. The blanket is not very important for the picture, it's just kind of a base that surrounds the dog, so I wanted it to be loose and painterly. With the amount of detail, you can really command the viewer's attention to where you want it to be. You can compare it to the way our eyes work. If you look at a certain spot, your area of focus is very small and everything around it is there. Of course, you can see it, but it's not really in focus. You want to apply that same logic to your paintings, so add as much detail as you want to the places where you want people to pay attention. So the dog, its face and the paws are the most important. The blanket around it, not so much. You can see I am using a layer effect. I'm adding a little bit of a white glow around any line to make stars. That is a very easy way to create magic effects, starlight, or just the effect of illumination. I added the star first to mimic the star marking the dog has on her forehead, and then add more little stars into the dark background. I then added some highlights to her eyes and nose, because that star of course would be reflected on those wet surfaces. But I then decided I didn't like the star very much and added instead these kind of ethereal specks coming off of her. I added a bit of warmth so the dog is more separated from the blue background behind her. And then that's it. Just a bit more color correction and the piece is finished. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want early access to these kinds of contents or more views behind the scenes, please consider subscribing to this channel or becoming a member on my Patreon. Bye everybody.